If you think the trade wars between the United States and China are merely rhetoric, think again. March of 2025 became a turning point that could shift the global energy balance for decades to come. China officially announced the termination of liquefied natural gas, LNG, imports from the United States, thereby stripping Washington of annual revenues totaling $2.4 billion. This is not just an economic decision, it is a political strike delivered with surgical precision. Why did China take this step now? Just 1 month earlier, the Trump administration once again imposed 10% tariffs on Chinese goods. Beijing's response was not only swift, but also strategically calculated. China did not issue loud proclamations, but quietly and effectively removed the United States from the global energy chessboard, replacing it with Australia. There is far more behind this move than meets the eye. Australia signed a 15-year contract worth $1.5 billion with one of China's largest energy conglomerates, China Resources Gas. Starting in 2027, Australia will begin supplying 600,000 tons of LNG annually. Why Australia? It's simple. The gas is 20% cheaper, and transportation takes 10 days less than from the United States. This is how new alliances are formed in a world where gas is more than just fuel. It is a geopolitical weapon. Australia, traditionally seen as a U.S. ally, is now becoming China's leading partner in energy. Moreover, Beijing has long made no secret of its strategy, diversifying suppliers and cutting dependence on American energy resources. Contracts with Qatar, Russia, and Central Asian countries, investments in pipelines, and the development of new logistics routes. All of this signals a clear plan. And in this story, the loser is obvious. It is the United States. After the halt in exports to China, American LNG terminals were left with unsold inventories. Contracts were canceled, costs increased, and logistics were disrupted. Europe, in turn, is shifting to cheaper Asian gas. Germany, the Netherlands, and Italy all are urgently revising their energy strategies. Port capacities are being expanded, and new storage facilities are under construction. And who is now the main player in Europe? China. Welcome to the reality of a trade war. The United States is losing the market, losing partners, losing leverage. The post-COVID recovery plan, which included energy dominance, has failed. Instead, the U.S. watches as Europe and Asia sign contracts with Canada, Australia, and Qatar. But that's not all. After Washington hit Canadian oil with a 10% tariff, Ottawa found a new buyer, Beijing. Through the expanded Trans Mountain Pipeline, China now receives up to 890,000 barrels per day. This is not just logistics, it is a show of strength. 50% of all Canadian oil exports are now directed to China. Meanwhile, America is left with limited supply and rising domestic prices. Canada is rapidly replacing the United States not only in oil, but also in LNG. The LNG Canada project, one of the largest in North America, launches in 2025 and will provide up to 26 million tons per year. The U.S., which until recently dominated the market, is now losing ground. Against the backdrop of increasing Canadian deliveries, Beijing is cutting not only purchases of American gas, but also food products. Grain, corn, soybeans, Washington's traditional bargaining chips, are losing relevance. The share of American soybeans in China's imports has dropped from 40% in 2016 to 18%. Taking their place are Brazil and Argentina. Meat? Europe, especially Spain and the Netherlands, have become the new pork superpowers for Beijing. In 2023 alone, pork exports from the EU to China rose by 35%, while American exports collapsed due to tariffs and new inspections. And here is the result. American farmers are going bankrupt. Overproduction, falling prices, losses. This is the new reality for the U.S. agricultural sector. Small farms are suffering the most, unable to quickly adapt. But it's not just agriculture that's taking the hit. The technology sector is also experiencing losses. Companies like Google, Tesla, and Intel are losing market share. China is withdrawing investments from the United States, favoring Canada, Europe, and BRICS countries instead. A gradual erosion of America's global influence has begun. And in the midst of this, against the backdrop of economic losses, Washington announces the F-47 fighter jet project, a next-generation aircraft meant to replace the F-35, the most powerful, deadly, technologically advanced. But the cost of the project raises questions. With a defense budget of $800 billion, millions of Americans are facing cuts to social programs. Where are the priorities? While the White House discusses fantasies about annexing Canada, real alliances are slipping out of control. Ottawa is expanding defense cooperation with Europe and Australia, strengthening ties with Japan and South Korea. The Canadian Prime Minister has already made it clear. The strategic direction has been set, but it does not point toward Washington. And the cherry on top, Trump's support for the idea of joining the Commonwealth of Nations under the leadership of King Charles. A strange move, considering that it implies a partial loss of sovereignty. But Trump presses on. He spends evenings with $445,000 Birkin bags, while the U.S. economy slips into negative 2.5% GDP growth and consumer confidence hits record lows. All of this forms the backdrop for escalating conflict with China, Europe, Canada, and allies. Isolation threatens to escalate into a systemic crisis. America is losing influence, while China is building a new architecture of global trade, flexible, autonomous, and oriented toward Asia and Europe. Share your opinion. Is this a temporary downturn or the beginning of the end of U.S. global dominance?